Well, first of all, I want to say welcome to Straight Talk. I'm glad that my special guests are here, but before we get to them, there are a few things I want to say. And of course, welcome to you all that are listening in. Some very important things have happened in the legislature this week, and we're going to get to those in coming weeks. And the legislature itself is going to be meeting. I think we have about 13 days left, legislative days. That doesn't include like weekends or a holiday or something of that nature. But I want to encourage the members of Straight Talk. The people are listening in on Straight Talk to to keep an eye on the legislature because a lot of things are on the table that are pretty big, quite frankly. The budget being one of them. So we want to be very intentional about that piece. But today, I want to get straight to the subject matter because there's a big issue rolling through the legislature right now. And I've invited my very, very special guests this morning who were involved in that process, along with myself, to discuss this because we think it's important to get this information, as much information as we have, out to the general public instead of individuals trying to figure out what it is and what it isn't. So I have as my special guest today State Senator Morgan McGarvey, who is the minority or Democratic floor leader in the legislature, in the Senate. We have Evon Smith, who's the executive director of OneWest, who's doing a very fine job in developing in this area and has contributed tremendously to this process we're getting ready to discuss. And Nikki Lanier. Nikki Lanier with the Federal Reserve Bank. I have to say that I've just grown in my appreciation of Nikki and her role and her knowledge in this process is just impressive. I got to say it because in my business, you run around a lot of people, a lot of information, but I didn't know Nikki had all that information. So I was really impressed by that as well as Evon. So that being said, why don't we just dive right into it? What we just did is we filed two bills in the Senate, Senate Bill 100, Senate Bill 125, which is before the Senate, and we had a bill that's related to the revenue raising side on the House side filed as well, because all revenue matters must start on the House side. But this was the product of a process of folks coming together. I just wanted to, I'm just going to throw this one out there. Whoever feels they have the best handle on this. How did this come together? I know we worked for almost 9 months on this. The four of us were involved. Who wants to take a stab at that? Come on, Nikki.
I'm happy to. Thank you, Senator, for allowing us an opportunity to talk about this important moment, this important legislation for the West End. So, several months ago, 8 or 9 months ago, Evon and I, Evon in her context as leader, president of OneWest, and me, I chair the OneWest board. We had the occasion to meet with these amazing senators, you, of course, Senator Neal, Senator McGarvey, Senator Stivers, and Senator Julie Rocky Adams. Really, it was more of an exploratory discussion just to talk about the lived experience of Black West Louisvillians and just Black people in Louisville. So I just applaud these senators wanting to come and understand from an organization's perspective, what's happening, what's the sum total of the lived experience that senators, legislators need to better understand in order to apply an equity lens to lawmaking. And so it was very exploratory. It was very organic. We answered questions about vacant and abandoned properties as we have come to know that reality, that problem in the West End. We answered questions around what is it like to bank while Black? What's the issue with the difficulty that a lot of Black folks experience in trying to do something as simple as just to get a loan for a business or for personal use. So we had business leaders from across the West End of Louisville who came and spoke and presented their case, stated their case, if you will, to these great senators. And they took lots and lots of notes and listened attentively. We talked about home ownership. We talked about the Responsible Revitalization Conference that Evon can speak more cogently to than I. But OneWest sponsored a Responsible Revitalization Conference several years ago. And we talked about the sum total of what we understood, the fears that West Louisville has around gentrification, around what development might mean by way of being priced out of their homes. So we just had conceptual conversations from that came the kind of distillation of how we could package legislatively during this session a response, not but a response to what we heard. So I guess I'll toss it over to one of my other amazing colleagues to take it from there.
So Yvonne, your perspective on how this came together.
So Nikki has it exactly right. And I think OneWest was invited to the table because OneWest has over 5 years of community conversations and engagements where we've been listening to the community around the challenges and concerns. And we've also recognized with 350 blocks and over 60,000 people, the West End would be, if it was its own city, it would be the 4th largest city in Kentucky. And so we started understanding with that, we have less than 40% home ownership. So we have a significantly destabilized area that unless you put in some very targeted resources, the community would continue to see the transitions that are going on. And of course, with 4,000 vacant and abandoned properties, you can't control who may come into your community, but what you can do is try to secure those that are there. And so that's why we were able to give significant feedback around what the community told us gentrification meant to them, which was forced displacement. And so in this legislation, we were able to bring that concern to the table to helpfully encourage and insist that there be language that would ensure that residents who are there today would not be forced out by the new investments that are being made in the West End.
And we're going to get into the substance of that a little bit more in depth because it's a very important point that you're raising here, and it was very key and central to the discussion we had. So I'm going to call you Morgan.
Please.
We're going to be on the first name basis here. Morgan, your perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree with, I mean, first of all, it's been so wonderful working with Nikki, working with Evon, working with you, Gerald, for, you and I have known each other a long time. And this is, I think this has been some of the most fun we've had together. And I want to go back to what Nikki was saying about how this got started. And so people understand this. It's not that a group of legislators came in to the West End and said, we have the answer, here's the plan. We came in and said, we need to know what can be done to help. Let's listen.
So describe the process.
The process was, I don't think pen was put to paper on an actual bill draft until months after our first meeting. And there were series of meetings leading up to that, right? I mean, really getting into the community. And I say this, everybody comes at things from different perspectives and different angles and different lenses. And some of us maybe had a different knowledge base to start with. But, when Nikki said, how do we structuralize equity? How do we begin to legislate with an equity lens, which is so important? There was some learning too, to understand what the structural inequities were that existed, I think. And it was hearing those, seeing those, listening to everything going on around. And then of course, coming in saying, I know people think like, oh, you guys are in the state Senate, you can fix anything. There's only so many tools in our toolbox. So within what we're able to do from our role in government, what's the best way we can help? And we really had to figure that out. And so I thought that process of learning, of meeting with so many different people from all over the West End and getting that community input and understanding, first of all, we've got to do something to help. We've got to do something now big and bold that can be transformational. But we cannot in any way, shape, or form do it in the way that's been done that displaces people, that rips apart the fabric of the community. And so, I think we had those two missions going and then started to draft the bill and ultimately came out with what you guys saw. And the day we introduced it, you guys all know this because you were there. We had a press conference at 10 o'clock that morning. We were on a Zoom at 8:15 that morning, still making changes to the bill, right?
So Morgan,
yeah.
So let me jump in just for a second because she said this is the most fun time you've had. this was the most arduous time I've had, I have to say, because I don't think on any matter, I have been on so many Zoom conferences um, over a period of time and on any subject that I've had. But it was a learning process, quite frankly. I think we all learned a little bit from our various perspectives, but I really like the way the expertise was brought to the table to try to figure out, because this thing was very complex. You had constitutional issues involved. You had practical issues in terms of statutory considerations that were involved. And a significant amount of our discussion, as I recall, was around those things. How do we get to these core issues and do it within the framework that the law permitted? And that was a big situation. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get to some of these core issues. If we could list some of these core issues, who feels best suited for that at this time? Would that be you, Evon?
I'm happy to.
Now I'm talking about core issues that affect the community that we were focusing on in terms of housing and business development and that sort of thing. And
Right.
then what I would like to do is I want to jump over to back to Morgan, because I like Morgan to get into some of those constitutional issues. Don't get too deep in the weeds, Morgan, but just enough so we can understand what the challenges were to even get to where we are now. So Evon.
Yes, sir.
Then I'm gonna come back to Nikki. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first I'll start with the housing piece. Some of the core issues that we dealt with was the fear around forced displacement. So we knew we had to have measures in the bill that would handle the existing primary residents, homeowners that are in the West End today, not having to have their tax base go up as a result of new investment coming into the community.
Well, let me back up. Let me back up a minute. Let me back up. No, I'm going way before that.
Okay.
I'm talking about where the community is.
Sure.
What does the housing stock look like?
Sure.
What are the deficiencies in the community? What's the history behind the way government has functioned in the community? What has been the disinvestment in the community?
Absolutely.
What has happened in terms of our businesses in our community? Where are Black folks in this particular piece in terms of not just home ownership, but also in terms of small business or other larger business development, those kinds of issues?
So we know today that we have a significant amount of disinvestment that's happened over the course of time in the West End. From industry leaving. It's one thing to have a couple of businesses leaving, but we've had whole industries that have left the West End. We've also had, and so that left a lot of vacant warehouses, a lot of vacant manufacturing. We've had a lot of people that have been affected by redlining. We've had people that couldn't get loans to move to other parts of the city. We've had predatory lending that has run rampant in our community. So you can't qualify for a market rate loan, but you can qualify for a loan at 18, 19, and 20%. That is definitely creating a barrier for our community. And then we also are faced with something that there are not many cities in the country that will allow third-party liens for your taxes. So there is another predatory practice that has caused some of our West End families to have multiple predatory lenders as lien holders. So these are absentee lenders who don't live in the city, don't live in our state in some cases, who have put loans on people's homes in order for those families to be able to pay their taxes. Well, with that, they've gone and charged astronomical fees and interest rates and things of that nature. So the families can never move to a position of wealth. And then if we couple that with a lot of the systemic barriers that are in place that include higher rates for insurance, higher rates for bonding for our local businesses, if they can get it at all. We've had security companies that couldn't even get bonding or insurance just for their business. So we know that there are several business owners that have been excluded out of not only loans, but the ability to build their net worth. They can't get loans in some cases for equipment. In other cases, they can't even get leases. So we've seen a number of challenges there. And then let me get to the big one, which is why OneWest was established. So we've got a number of small businesses trying to operate out of spaces that are not being maintained and kept by absentee landlords. Well, if they complain, then they run the risk of getting put out of their location, and then where are they to go? So we have been able to start looking at how do you redevelop commercial spaces for small businesses and do it with an equity lens. So Nikki has been adamant that that be a position that we take. And so you are going to see numerous initiatives where we're actually saying equity is not starting at a place of equality, because if you do not take into consideration what a society that was inequitable caused, you cannot help someone get to a position of equalness until you address the inequities that they have faced. So you've got to put equity in the equation, and that may mean helping somebody to get to a table of equality so they can ultimately compete on a fair basis. Right now, our West End community is significantly behind the rest of the city in terms of investment that's been made, not only in the people and in the residents, but in the businesses. So this is a way, this bill is a way to start getting opportunity to the table of resources, real financial resources. And I'm not talking about the game we've been playing, going one foundation to the other, trying to get peanuts to be able to do something temporarily. I'm talking about real, responsible revitalization that puts real dollars in the hands of the Black community to help them affect change for their future and for their children's future. And so that's what this is really about.
So well said. And I'm Morgan, I'm gonna go to Nikki. I'm gonna ask Nikki to describe what was it that this process that we, the four of us and some others were engaged in, what did it lead to in terms of what needed to be in that bill? Could you describe that?
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you. So let me just piggyback and give some context to what I'm about to say on what Evon just said. I think it's important to recognize the why behind the what. And here's the context. Black people in this country, certainly in Louisville, certainly in the West End, from a policy perspective, know nothing except for exploitation. I mean, that has been the theme for the entirety of our existence in this country, is exploitation, manipulation, not really clear on, there's always a shoe to drop. There's always something behind what is presented to us as a remedy to our plight. And so I think, we're all quite tired of that, quite beleaguered by that kind of construct. And so the insistence on equity is the lens through which, all of our work is done at OneWest. And quite frankly, I'm happy to bring the full weight and the authority and the credibility of the Federal Reserve to this process and talking about it. So there's a couple of things that were important in this bill to reflect the reality that we're working against those headwinds of perspectives around exploitation.
Be specific.
So one is, this had to be Black led. So Black people have to be in charge of the yeses and the nos in terms of how loans are going to be allocated, what's funded by way of development, how development is to take place. Black people need to be in charge of the yeses and nos on that. And they need to have, buoying those yeses and nos, a significant coffer to offer up against those projects.
You're talking
so
about
this
money.
$30 million, this $30 million is a good start. It's a good start that we're going to be able to move some direction forward. But this board,
but let's take
statute.
If you be so patient with me, let's take those a point at a time.
Okay.
So this is a bill that portends to put a minimum of $30 million initially.
Yes.
A minimum, $10 million from the legislature, from the state, and $20 million, a combination between private and public funds.
Yes.
On the Louisville level, right?
City. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So $30 million is the coffer at the outset. But I think I want to talk about two things, and then if there's others that want to add color to this, I'm happy to invite that. One is that it is Black led. So 51% of this authority board construction, so the folks that will have governance over the decision-making by statute, and we insisted on this by statute, this is important, will always be Black-led, not minority, Black, African-American. So that was codified in statute, and we're very excited about that. And so that's about the value preservation. It's important that we're able to bring the decision-making lens through the Black experience, through Black lived experience to the way that we think about development. And then of course, the preservation of home ownership for those that are owner-occupied homes, so that there is, while the tax assessments may be increasing, the tax rate, what taxes will be paid will be based on this year. I'm not saying this as articulately as probably Morgan can. What will be paid each year annually is based on this tax year, 2021, for the next 30 years. So there isn't an increase in your tax rate.
So let me jump in there just for a second. So as I understand it there, what we're talking about is people who, right now, as of January of 2021, who have home ownership and this is their primary residence, those people and their heirs who would also use that property as a primary residence would have the benefit of this 30-year tax freeze on property tax, regardless of the valuation going up. The payment would be at the January 21 level. I think I stated that right.
That is beautifully clear.
Right.
And that is because, Senator, what we heard from the Responsible Revitalization Conference and all of the community engagement initiatives that we've undertaken over the last 6 years with OneWest was very clear. Black folks in the West End who own their homes do not want to have their taxes increased because a Chick-fil-A or a Red Lobster comes in. They want the value of the West End to increase, but they don't want to be priced out of their homes. So this bill protects against that.
So what does that have against gentrification, though?
So what do you mean?
Well, I mean, that's an anti-gentrification tool. In other words, your tax rates don't go up.
Yeah.
With respect to valuations that are expected to go up if it's done right. So therefore, there's not that pressure from those valuations going up against your pocketbook and standing at home. It doesn't become a displacement factor.
That's right. It's a stopgap against that. I mean, it doesn't prevent, but it inhibits significantly that kind of manifestation of gentrification. You're right.
Right.
So a quick example, Senator Neal, if someone is on a fixed income today and redevelopment is happening all around them, they don't have to worry about the new evaluation of their home, because it will be evaluated at a higher rate, but they don't have to worry about their tax rate going up, so that they have to then try to figure out where to find new income in order to stay in their homes.
Well, they don't have to worry about a tax rate because they don't have to pay. Their payment is freezed for 30 years.
That's right.
So Morgan, that raises a question. I mean, the law requires certain things to happen. How could you make something like that happen? What's the difficulty we ran into and we talked about over and over again and had to bring experts in to talk about it? Talk about it.
Yeah, we're threading some needles. And I think, first of all, I just want to so echo the comments of Evon and Nikki. And how important it was to put this equity lens on everything we were doing. And look, one of the other things we're learning in talking this is the understandable and justifiable distrust that might come from doing some of these things. So we couldn't just say it's going to be a Black-led board, trust us. We couldn't just say there's not going to be gentrification, trust us. These things had to be put in the law. And I think that's a really important point. You know, Nikki said it, put it in statute. Plain English, it's going to be law that these have to happen. And so you're going to have the first time in Kentucky history, we're going to have a Black-led board in statute, because we heard not only do we want this change, we want it to be community-driven change. And I think Nikki brought up some great points, said it really well. And then, of course, we get into the displacement piece that Nikki and Evon both talked about. And we've got to guard against that. You know, right now, the Constitution in Kentucky requires that property continue to be assessed every year. I know people don't want to hear about that. You know, you say keep out of the weeds. You mention the word Constitution, people think you're in the weeds. But we had to really kind of craft a narrow path through statute to make sure that this goes through. And so basically the way we've done that is exactly what you've heard said. We are freezing everybody's property tax payments where they are this year. One other thing we didn't mention, we talked about this protects your heirs. This goes on for the life of the TIF for 30 years, but you do have to have been living in the West End in these 9 neighborhoods we've identified as the TIF as of January of this year. Now, people might say, well, why is that? Part of that is also to protect against gentrification. We don't want people moving in and trying to exploit a process that's meant to help this community. So we've gone ahead and we've drafted it that way that the property tax payments aren't going to go up. If for some reason they do start to go up, we've given the board a mandate to pay any overage of what you had this year with the money that they're receiving from the TIF. So we've tried to safeguard against it in a couple of ways. And I think, you know, we're going to hopefully get the bill passed and then I think it'll be successful.
Well, go on and describe that TIF. Let's get that straight. How does that TIF work?
Yeah, people hear TIF and I think their eyes glaze over. I know mine used to do the same thing. Basically what you do is we've drawn a map, and within that map are the 9 neighborhoods. Now, already there are tax dollars generated in those 9 neighborhoods. So we're going to take the tax dollars generated this year from those 9 neighborhoods and say that's our base. Going forward, any additional tax revenue over what was there this year, 80% of that comes back to this board. So 80 cents of every dollar of new revenue going forward comes back in. That can be sales tax. You go buy something, you get more sales tax in these 9 neighborhoods, 80% of that new money comes back to this board. Withholding tax. If Brown Foreman hires 50 new people, the withholding taxes from those employees, 80% of that, 80 cents of every dollar comes back in to be invested by this board into the community for the people who live there. So, I mean, there's all sorts of, any new businesses come up, any new things open up, you know, if it's new and it's all brand new, 80% of every dollar that's generated comes back into the West End. So, I mean, this is a really big and powerful tool. We're still working with the governor's office on some of these number projections, but over the life of this TIF, over the 30 years that this is in existence, I mean, I think this is going to mean hundreds of millions of dollars. It could even get into, you know, potentially $1 billion. So I think this is an incredibly powerful tool. As Evon, I think it was Evon said it. It's not just going around and begging to foundations or doing those kinds of things to do good work. This is going to be a steady stream of income. You can even issue bonds. And I know I told you I get to stay out of the weeds. That just means, you know, that the board can say we're expecting this much revenue coming in, and we're going to go ahead and get a bond available to a government type agency where we can get that money on the front end and then pay it off with the money that comes in over the life of the TIF to get a big infusion of cash and to help people now. So, I mean, I think it's a very powerful tool.
Okay, well, let me go to something here, because we talked about, and I think this is something we really need to drive home clearly, this black lead piece. It's more than that. And if we get into a discussion of the board, we also have to, when you're talking about that kind of money, you also have to have expertise at that table as well. And that board was structured to make sure that expertise is at that table as well. But there are guaranteed seats out of the 9 neighborhoods, 5 that will rotate to make sure there's representation over time of all those neighborhoods. But there's also a secondary board, which is an advisory board. And I'm gonna tell you, I get excited about this one too a lot. Remember, we had some very strong discussions about that, and we had a very strong insistence about this, that there be an advisory board additionally that also evaluated and recommended, and that becomes more leverage in terms of making sure it's closer to what should happen in that district. But those individuals would come out of those 9 neighborhoods, and those boundaries now, as they stand, are roughly from Algonquin to north to the river and west of 9th Street to the river. And that Algonquin boundary may expand a few blocks to get the traditional black neighborhoods into that particular piece. So I know we're looking at that. And that's the other point I want to make, is that we're in a period legislatively, Morgan, as you know, that this is still in the Senate. Amendments can be made. It's going to go over to the House if it passes the Senate, and then amendments can be made there. So this is a perfect time for folks to engage this process, ask questions, and to find out what they think is missing that can properly be put in this bill. The other thing I want to say is very important is that we're not going to drive what happens in the community. This is what I'm excited about. Politicians, OneWest, somebody else is going to drive what happens in that. It's going to be driven by the Black-led board as well as that advisory board inputting in a very significant way out of that district as well. So Evon, does this picture, this piece that we're describing here, what have I left out, or what is it that gives it the kind of strength and gets you excited, I should say, about your work, not just your work, but your observations going forward in terms of these 9 neighborhoods?
Well, one of the things that gets me excited is definitely the fact that the board
I'm
will
hearing
be
a little
led.
background noise from somebody. I'm not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the things that really gets me excited is that this board will be coming from the community primarily, and the community voice will be the loudest voice in the room. The other thing is the 9-member advisory committee will also have a significant amount of influence, because that will have representation from all 9 neighborhoods. So the communities themselves, the neighborhoods themselves, should be getting prepared who should be the person to represent in that advisory committee. Because
we don't determine that.
Right, we don't determine that. No,
you're not saying who's going to be at that table.
That's right.
They just got to be. They just have to come out of those neighborhoods.
That's right. The community.
They are going to determine who's going to be on those tables.
That's right. And they will determine what's important to them in terms of projects and initiatives that are presented to be funded. And so this is where the community will have an engine right in the community that is focused on helping them to get initiatives done that they value.
But Evon, you have some institutions that are on that board. Explain why there was a focus on including certain institutions on that board.
Absolutely. So
name them.
Okay. So there's 17 seats right now on the board. And we have the Urban League represented, NAACP, OneWest, Federal Reserve, Volunteers of America, a seat for foundations over a certain size, and a seat for a bank over a certain size, preferably one that has stated a national commitment to Black communities across the country. Then 5 seats for representation from the 9 neighborhoods, a seat for U of L, a seat for Simmons College of Kentucky, or HBCU, which is what they are, a government appointee, a mayor appointee, and a metro government appointee. And
now, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
And the reason for that was we knew that we had to have the historical context of urban communities and the needs that they've had. So the Urban League was important. And I want to remind folks, don't get caught up in characters or personalities. Understand that the institutions and their representation and the community's voice with those institutions is what we're trying to hit. NAACP, that over 100 years of civic responsibility and civil rights advocacy was very important. OneWest, because of community development, technical know-how and understanding. Federal Reserve, because of the need to have the collective group of banks and their understanding of this work and the need for this work to be done in the right way, and their CRA initiatives to underscore this work. The bank with the national focus on Black communities is important, because you want to have a resource that is already there and in place, understanding the initiatives that are being presented for support. The Simmons College of Kentucky was very important because it's the only HBCU we have in the city of Louisville. And we've got to have the student voices and the representation of those voices at the table in everything we do. And one of the things that we miss in our city is the understanding of how important an HBCU is to underscoring and solidifying into perpetuity our Black middle class. And that only happens when you have that HBCU involved and you're not bringing them in as an after fact. The governor appointment, mayor appointment, and metro appointment all speak for themselves. That representation is important because we're calling this a partnership for a reason. There's a state, local government, and private, as well as community partnership here that we're hoping is going to work in the right way to affect change for residents and business owners in the West End.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because it's not like this operates in a vacuum. In fact, it takes all of those major institutions who are already engaged in the community to coordinate their activity in light of this new tool that's being introduced. I'm just to give you a quick example of that. Although this is bringing intentionality and the focus to funds to a specific area of the community, guess what? From the city standpoint, they are doing the infrastructure work. They're engaged in ongoing infrastructure work independent of this. But if you really stop and think about it, if you look at it, they could have come out of the same hymnal with respect to this, because you're going to have solid and stable and new infrastructure in light of the fact that we have an aging and crumbling infrastructure in the area that we're talking about. So that benefits. If you talk about University of Louisville, the University of Louisville is a gift to this community. Think about it. The intellectual capital that you gain from the many areas of expertise of people who spent their whole lives studying stuff, that we must get the information and benefit of their research and their input and their advice and so forth. And then of course there's the community, which is, I think, is the key to this whole thing. The community is the key, because, you know, all too long, folks come and say, here's what you need, here's what you want, blah, blah, blah. And the community just, you know, who's going to say no if you bring something new to the table? But who says what the community wants? Well, who are the people in the community that drive this process? And that's going to be a real critical piece, because that means that they're going to have information on an ongoing basis. That means that they're going to have to meet with each other. That means they're going to have to resolve it. And even though there are people in the community now that are doing great work, I mean, just think what would happen if the people that right now are working in this community disappeared. See, you would say, oh, this community is in bad shape, but the fact of the matter is it would have been in significantly worse shape if the committed people in this community, I'm talking about big and small, did not do the work that they did. So they're part of this process as well. But we also want to open it up to people on other levels of the community, in neighborhoods. We want to get all kinds of fresh thoughts stirred into that process. So this is not about our determining how that has to play out. I think the community, that's going to be a big step. It's going to be a big issue. Yeah. They're going to have to determine how that's going to come about. So Nikki, what's your perspective on that from a federal standpoint, or from dollars that we're not even thinking about or talking about right now? What's your vision of this thing? What's the potential here?
Well, let me talk for a second about how this folds into, I think, the advancing mindset that the Federal Reserve is adopting around the link between equity and economics. Some of your viewers may follow the work that's coming out of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, the Boston Fed, certainly the Atlanta Federal Reserve, the St. Louis Fed, from which I hail. And we are talking very clearly about the inextricable link between racism and economics. And we're talking about it as a macroeconomic issue, not a micro. Why is that important? We're elevating the conversation to suggest that racism is an issue that has beleaguered the entire economy, not just Black folks. So this is not a social justice issue. This is not a remedy that needs to just be in place for Black people to benefit Black people, but Black people deserve amplified and accelerated remedies to help advance their economic well-being so the entirety of the American economy can continue to advance. And so the Fed is waking up to that in ways that are just unbelievable and unprecedented, and I couldn't be happier. And in my mind, this work advances that. I mean, so much of what we are promulgating in the statute is absolutely unprecedented. I can't say it enough how important this lens, the Black lived experience lens, to decision making will be in terms of the yeses and nos. That has never happened in the history of Kentucky. Never happened. To be codified, especially in statute, and to be bequeathed with a $30 starting fund, $30 million starting fund, if you will, for purposes of that. And you're absolutely right, Senator. This idea that, you know, Black folks are so tired of being told what revitalization ought to look like for them. And so this absolutely empowers the Black community. This is not revitalization to community. This is revitalization with. It's not even for community, because that feels almost condescending and benevolent bequeathing that's not necessarily genuine. But this is absolutely about working with and in being informed by what community desires. And we codify that in statute. You insisted on that, Senator, for the advisory council. I mean, that was you were very clear and emphatic about making sure that we thought about an advisory council on top of the 5 seats for a community that will be on this board. And then you're right, we made sure that the folks that have already been doing this work without this kind of resource, folks like the Urban League and NAACP, who have been really imbued in this work, imbued by this work.
Neighborhood groups. I mean, look,
the
neighborhood
groups,
leaders
absolutely.
and have toiled and continue to toil, or they're part of this process as well. And they need to ask. Let me ask you a question. And I take one issue with you, because I think it is a social justice issue myself, because I think it's intentionality, it's intentional, it's targeted, it's in an area that's been deprived all along. And I know from a macro standpoint, it's just hey, look, let's face the reality of what we have and what our history is and what our role is in it. But down on the ground, and the potential for positive outcomes where there have been too many negative outcomes, I consider it a social justice issue myself.
Sir, I think you're right. Yeah, no, it is a social justice issue, but it's not that by itself. And what I think the Fed is looking, well, but the reason why I think it's important to really make sure that we're using the words beyond social justice is because a lot of times white, affluent, and influential systems view social justice as charitable. And so we're amplifying the conversation and the policy making to suggest that this is far from charity, right? So this is an economic issue that affects all of us.
I don't care how whites define it. There needs to be justice, and it needs to be now. And they have a role in it, and they should participate in it. And this is not a demand, and it's not an ask. I'm saying this is a reality that we must all recognize, because we all are truly in this together, and we have responsibility and obligation to each of us. But your point's well taken, and I take it that way. So, Morgan,
Senator Neal,
yes.
I want to make sure that we do address the issue of the tax being frozen is not that it's accumulating to hit people at some future date. It is being paid. It is being paid by this new organization that's created to collect that tax base. So we want people to know, while they will get a tax bill that shows that their values are going up, that is not a bill they will be expected to pay. This entity will be paying that as they go throughout, beyond today's tax rate, beyond 2021's tax rate. So we need people to understand that, so they're not worried about what happens. Are they going to get hit with some big bill at the end of 30 years? That's not what's happening.
I'm gonna bounce this over to Morgan, but Morgan, when you talk, also address the issue. What happens if someone that's this is not now, if it's not their primary residence, or they want to sell it outside of the heirs who would not make it a primary residence? What would happen there? And then I want to get your perspective as well on the efficacy or the power of what this could be.
Yeah, and just go back and address a couple of things. I mean, it's so awesome to still hear Nikki and Evon talk about this, and the board is going to be really cool. And one thing you said, Senator Neal, about how much input we've sought and continue to seek input. So please give us your input. I mean, we have made changes to this board so many times because we've talked to members of the community who had an idea. One thing that I haven't heard mentioned yet about the board is of the 5 community members, one of them will have to be between the ages of 18 and 30 when appointed to the board, which is a great suggestion we got from several community members saying, hey, you know, look at Russell, look at some of the places in West Louisville, and you're getting a lot younger people move in here. We want them to have a say on this board so that their voice is represented for what they're experiencing now. And of course, they're going to be living in the community hopefully for a lot longer. And so that's one cool suggestion that came up, I think is worth talking about. When you talk about the board, another thing is what Evon said, it's your tax payment that's going to be frozen where it is. You're not going to pay more in taxes next year than you did this year. And for the next 30 years, you're not going to pay more in taxes than you did this year, unless you sell the property. Now, if somebody passes away and they leave it to their heirs, right, someone in their family, that family member can move in as long as they live in that home. Then their payments are going to stay the same for the next 30 years. Now, if you sell the home, what happens is the person who buys the home is going to pay the normal tax rate at the current assessed value of the home. So there's no back taxes. There's not like this is all piling up for some due bill later, right? This is just, if somebody sells their home, then the person who buys it pays the normal tax rate that everybody else in the city of Louisville has at the assessed value of the home. What we're hoping is that assessed value of the home is going to go up, because one of the other things we were talking about, and Nikki did such an amazing job. And Nikki, you sent out the thing that the Fed is sending around talking about this, which is an incredibly powerful piece to read, you know, is we need to create wealth. And that's part of what we're trying to do here is create wealth. And so create an asset that someone can also pass on to their heirs. So this is just part of the power of this tool, part of the power of having these new monies come into this board so they can be spent, so that we can do things that are good for the community, by the community, that will benefit the community.
Talk a little bit about the organizing board and the permanent board in this process.
Yeah, so another thing about the board is it's going to self-perpetuate. We had to start somewhere. And I go back to something I said earlier about the tools we have in the toolbox. In the legislature, you know, we can't appoint an individual in statute to a board. That's not what we do. We don't put names of people in a statute. So we have these 5 community spots. They're going to be chosen by the members of the board. We're not choosing those members. We're putting institutions, as Yvonne said, the NAACP of Louisville, OneWest, the Urban League of Louisville. I mean, traditional champions who understand and work with these issues on the ground. But as the board goes forward, the board is going to help determine who those people are from those organizations. The board is going to determine who the people from the community are who are on this board. And there's going to be rotation so that all the members of the community are represented. We get a lot different voices in there. And I also think once this board gets up and going, that when it has meetings, these meetings are going to be open to the public. They are going to be under the same open meetings and open records laws of a government agency. They're going to be posted. This isn't going to be some secret meeting. They're going to be open meetings. The community is going to get to come and voice their opinion. And obviously you're going to have the board, I think, be responsive to that in ways even that the government can't be. So I'm excited about what it'll do, how it'll keep going forward, and how I think it'll keep looking out for the neighborhood.
Now I want to stick something out there. I'm going to give my email address in Frankfurt. It's gerald.neal@lrc.ky.gov. And what I want folks out there to do is I want you to ask questions, because we don't have all the answers. It's needed for you to ask questions. If you think that there's something you can do, particularly between here and the time, hopefully we get this through, then we're going to need your input during that period. So it's not like, you know, let's just get this thing done sort of thing. It's that the legislature has to be out of town no later than April 15th, and we'll probably be out of town before that because we have a short session.
March 30th this year.
30th this year, okay. So
March 30th.
what that means is that, you know, it's okay to say nobody's reached out to me. Well, I understand that, but I'm telling you right now, Gerald.Neal, Gerald.Neal lrc.ky.gov. And if you don't get it, you can come back to my Facebook page and you can roll this up and you can get it again. Or you can get in contact with Nikki Lanier at the Federal Reserve. Or you can get in contact with Evon Smith at OneWest. Or you can get in contact with Morgan McGarvey, because his email address is morgan.mcgarvey@lrc.ky.gov. So what we're doing is inviting you to input. We can't get to everyone. I got, in my district alone, overall, I got 115,000 people, give or take, and Morgan has the same. So it's difficult to do that. But I've gotten tremendous amount of responses from folks, and I've reached out to a lot of different people, and a lot of people have inputted this. But we're gonna miss somebody, and you may have something extremely important to put on this table. So we invite that. And the other thing I want to put out is this. Some people, they came to me and said, well, so-and-so is just doesn't think suspicious about this, or so-and-so thinks that, well, who says this is going to do it? And I keep telling folks, why shouldn't they have, some people have a reaction like that in a community where things have been promised and not delivered over and over again? Why should we think for a moment? Why should we be naive and think that when somebody's talking about bringing a gift and putting it in a nice little pretty package, that you're just supposed to open up your arms and say hallelujah? No, that's not the way it works. We know that's not the way it works. You should be skeptical. You should ask critical questions. You should put your ear up, but you also have another side of that obligation, in my view. You should be constructive. You should help us build this while we have an opportunity. And then the community, we ought to get behind the community and the effort going forward. And I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna step out there just a little bit, because I'm betting that if we do this right, that means if the community does this right, with the assistance of the technical inputs and all that stuff and the vagaries of a financial market and all that good stuff, if they do this right, it's going to draw other people to this effort, because it's going to become part of a model of what's not happening in too many places in the United States of America. They're going to see what's happening here. And those boundaries that we're talking about, it won't just end up in West Louisville. When they see this model work, it's going to end up in Newburgh and Berrytown and out in Kentucky somewhere. It's going to be a tool that can be used in so many ways if we do it right. But we must be constructive. We must do it together. I'm gonna give everybody a last word. I'm gonna start with the ladies. I'm gonna give Yvonne the last word. I'm gonna start with Nikki, then I'm gonna go to you, Morgan, then I'm gonna give Yvonne the last word.
Yes, thank you, Senator. So I'm excited about what's to come. I'm excited about the momentum and the awakening and the reconciliation that we're all are going through, and what policy positions we will have to take in order to close the gaps that racism has left and heal the wounds of inequity. So I'm happy to be a part of any remedy that furthers that. So thanks for this opportunity to talk to your followers.
Yeah, and again, I echo the words of Nikki Lanier. I'm excited too, but this is the beginning. I'm excited, but I'm not satisfied. We have a lot of work to continue to do to chip away, to whittle down systemic racism and the structural inequities that exist. This is a tool in doing that. I'm sure excited to be a part of it.
This is Yvonne. I am so grateful and appreciative of all of you leaders and your leadership. But I will ask that the community of West End, if you have an address in the West End or you have a business in the West End, speak on your own behalf. Make sure that you let the senator know that this is working for you. You're excited to see these kinds of resources coming to the community. Remember, your voice is the most important. Just like we said at the Responsible Revitalization Conference, the community's voice is the most important. And when I say community, your address makes a difference. Where you live, you need to be your own best spokesman And that's what we're trying to get to here, is that's who we heard from. We have your address. Speak up for yourself. If you live in the West End or you have a business in the West End, it's time to advocate for yourself. And that's what this is all about, getting resources for those people.
Well, you've heard it. First of all, I want to thank each and one of you all taking the time this afternoon to come in and share this information. I know that you're going to join me going forward, because incrementally or from time to time, we're going to provide continuing information as to how this thing's evolving. I've already extended my email address in Frankfurt, as well as Senator McGarvey's. So we're expecting you to input and reach out to us. It's hard to reach out to 60,000 people. Well, we wouldn't do that anyway in terms of that, in terms of our ability to do that. We're not going to be able to do that except over vehicles like this. And we're trying to exploit every way to communicate with this, but we want you. I'm telling you, if you take this down, Gerald.Neal or morgan.mcgarvey@lrc.ky.gov, then that is a connector. We're inviting you to reach out to us. So thank you, guests. Thank you. We'll come back together periodically and share, and we'll be in other forums where we'll be sharing information individually and collectively. We're going to learn more. We're going to do more. We're going to do the best we can. So listening audience, thank you for joining us today. I ask you to share this with your contacts. I think it's that important. Share this with your contacts. And as I always say at the end of every program, do the right thing.